crowd here. Thanks all of y'all for attending. I'm going to introduce everyone. We're going to speak a little bit, and then we're just going to open up questions, and hopefully y'all can describe the conversation, whatever you're interested in. We'll ask our esteemed panel here to talk about. And to get started, I guess I'll just let everyone quickly introduce themselves and, start. Well, actually, let's go and my mouse turns on. We'll go in order of the slides. Y'all can read that, and JB, if you just want to quickly introduce yourself and talk about your company. And
yeah, sure. So I'm John Burkholz. I'm from JB. I've been doing freelance now for about 2-3 years. I guess 2 years now. I guess a similar story. If you want to know like history of how I felt and what's going on, there's a movie called I'm Buying Things, and I think the people inside there discuss and their feelings that they had with working with similar to what I had, where I looked around for a right home for me, and I tried a bunch of different places, and they were fantastic. I worked with a lot of fantastic people, including Mark, so it was fantastic working there, but it just wasn't, there was something I was missing, and I think one thing that was important for me is I like being my own boss. I think it's important for me, and my work schedule is, I'm one of the people that I work really, really late at night. I work on the weekends. I work I like working and I like coding. And so being a freelance, that aligns with my work ethic and schedule. So I do Rails work and I also do JavaScript work. And I run the Houston JavaScript group. And one thing that I do like about being freelance is that all these things that like TechFest and conferences I go to used to be something that was extra. Like I had my job and then I did this on the side. This is now like integrated with my job. Like part of me going to these conferences is marketing and putting things out and getting my name out there. So I guess that's a little thing. And I like doing it because I get to run business the way I think it should be run. And so, but that comes with a lot of responsibility. But I'm sure everyone else will speak similar concept.
Tony Champion?
So my name is Tony Champion. I'm Champion DS. I've been doing it for about 10 years now. Honestly, it kind of fell in my lap. I was coming out of a contract, and some of the stuff I was doing, some of the third-party vendors kind of followed up with me, wanted me to continue on work. So it's work starting from a lot of data analysis type stuff. Now it's mostly the entire Microsoft stack, the web. We do most of my work is XAML. I've got a few guys that work for me. We do mostly consulting and project-based work. We also do have a couple of products in the pipeline, some mobile apps, some web apps that are coming out in the next year or so. Really, as far as running your own business, I mean, I've gone back for a little bit, worked with somebody, and it just, once you get used to it, you get used to it. You set your schedule, whether it's good or bad, whether it's a 20-hour week or a 100-hour week. You kind of have a lot of control over that, and it's a lot of fun. You get to do what you get to bounce around. And I think that's one of the things I like about this. Is if I get towards the end of the project and we want to branch out to something else, we find work in that area and we can branch out. Whereas, if you're working a 9 to 5 and you're in the same spot, you don't really move a lot technology-wise. So it's a lot of fun, and we can keep up on things. And I said it's been about 10 years now, and hopefully we'll be another 10 after this.
And Marcus Egger?
Yeah, my name is Marcus Egger. I guess the biggest thing we're doing is I founded EPS Software Corporation, which means we're doing consulting, custom software training on the Microsoft platform, Android, iOS, HTML, the whole 9 yards basically. The thing we're probably best known for is we publish Code Magazine, and we do a lot of things under the Code brand, so the consulting we do is called Code Consulting. And that's kind of the main thing I've been doing. I'm doing a few different things, some even outside of technology, like real estate stuff. I'm involved in a company that does escrow and legal services called Tower 48. And we have a few new companies that I'm somewhat involved with, one in particular that I find very interesting right now, that does genetic sequencing. We hope to revolutionize the world of genetic sequencing with that. So quite a few different things, but the main thing is EPS Software. Founded that when I was 19. Coming up on our 20-year anniversary in November, so it's been a long time, and I guess it's what I've always wanted to do, and it was really no decision to go into that. It was always clear that I wanted to do that. So.
Kevin Hunter?
My name is Kevin Doctor. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been doing my own business since I was 30. That's for 30 years. I started when I was 19 too. I had my first software company. Every time I decided to stop doing what I was doing, like the company wasn't working well, I was too young, I had too inexperienced, I went and got a real job, and within 2 years I was back starting my own company again. So I had to stop resisting it and just say that I'm a serial entrepreneur, I'm just going to keep doing this. My current company is No Thirst Software. We develop Moneywell personal finance software for the Mac and iPad and iPhone. And got a few employees around the country. We're a very lightweight company. After having some heavyweight companies, I decided I wanted to have something that's very minimalist. So we wanted employees in 3 other states, and it's a lot easier to keep our virtual company going. I've had employees in Europe and consultants all over the world, and it's really fun nowadays to run a business, and there's a lot more opportunity, and certainly is a big change from the early 80s trying to run a company.
My name is Jeffrey Palermo, and I'm a managing partner at ClearMeasure in Austin. I started my career planning to go career military the whole time, but also got a software and programming education. I did do a year in Iraq in 2003, but after I came back, my mind is shifting around, not in that way, but worked at Dell for a little while, and then struck out on my own in 2006. Did a very small, started a software engineering company. Ultimately, I merged with a company called Headspring, that you might have heard of, and it was an email and website hosting company at the time that had started doing a little bit of app dev. And I joined to start the software engineering practice, which is what's there today. We sold off the old email and hosting website company and built it up to 30 over a 5-year period. And then with a partner that I met in my church, I resigned from that position as president of Headspring in January, started ClearMeasure, and we're focused on exactly one thing, which is software engineering, and not consulting, not training, which I've done before, but just software engineering projects on the Microsoft platform. And that's what we're currently doing in the last 10 months. It's been a wild ride. We've got up to 15 people.
And finally, Aaron Stokes.
My name is Aaron Stokes. I started my own company in 1995 after working for a few different consulting companies. The first one was EDS in Plano, and then a company that's long gone here, about 500 people. And I guess I started my company. Well, I'd always wanted to have my own software company, but I guess what gave me the inspiration is I was getting relatively low salary pay and working 60, 70 hours a week, and sort of thinking maybe there's a better way to do this. And generally, the overwhelming majority of the money my company makes is consulting, contracting. My wife also works for the company, and when I do have low periods, I do product development. Over the years, I've had a Visual Studio plugin that I sold, and lately I do a lot of mobile development. So I'll write mobile apps and put them in the app stores. But like I said, the overwhelming majority of the money I make is consulting related rather than software, and the software is lunch money and coffee money.
Can one of y'all go ahead and drop the projector so they don't have to stare at that the whole time? Someone over there on the side. I'll go ahead and I'll open it up with a question, and then we'll let y'all take over from there. When you're first getting started out, I think one of the things I've struggled with when I do consulting work on the side is how do you, until you have your name established, until you have enough connections established, how do you get enough project work to keep your head above water, in that initial stage? And whoever wants to jump on that.
My very first, so I worked for consulting companies, and they were relatively good size, so people were constantly leaving the company and going out into the industry, and then when they needed help, they would call the people they knew, I was one of those people that got called, and so that's how I got my first project. And I've never gone through any of the staffing companies or anything like that, the headhunter type companies. I've always gotten my projects via word of mouth, either people that I've worked for in the past, or somebody that's worked for me refers me, something like that. Occasionally, yeah, I do. I mean, I'll do things like this. I'll speak at TechFest or some of the other conferences, and so occasionally I'll get hooked up that way. Maybe I've gotten some work from the iPhone developers meetup. I've done some speaking there, and so people come up to me afterwards.
I mean, does anyone have a different take on that other than word of mouth being kind of the most important thing at the beginning?
I think some people have done a good job of, it's about networking. I mean, that's where you get a lot of your word of mouth. But there's also publishing, and also the speaking. I have a lot of friends that are doing consulting, contracting, and they write a book. It's not going to make you a lot of money, but it gets you that I'm an authority. I have published something. I am somebody, and that makes a difference when somebody's looking around saying, well, should I hire No Name or the guy that has a book? You know, you probably have, you don't write a whole book, but maybe you have an authoritative blog, or maybe you have something that you've discussed online with an article, with a publication. Anything to give you credibility, anything to boost your CV, which you have done in the past.
I think you have to decide what you're selling too, and if you're just selling your hands, if you're selling your skilled hands, it's probably not going to be as good for you. But if you're selling leadership and expertise, that's always in short supply, and people are always buying that. And the idea came is it's exactly right. Tactically, in 2006, when I first started, just me, and then built up from that. In 2005, I started running the Austin.NET user group, and I ran that group for 5 years. I was doing blogging, I was doing speaking, speaking at any sort of code camp conference, TechFest. If you can be a speaker around your region and establish yourself as a leader, as an expert in something, expertise is always in short supply, and people are always wanting to buy that. So it's just about awareness that you are an expert in that something, so that people know you're there.
I think it probably depends a little bit on what you want to start exactly, because I think there's definitely two completely different paths that you can take. And when this question was just asked, my first thought that I had was, well, step number one for us was we started a magazine. And well, that's obviously not something that everybody is, well, everybody could do it, but it's not something everybody's willing to do, because frankly it was kind of nuts a little bit. Worked out for us. But certainly there is a certain formula. If you go out on your own and you're looking for work, it's not that hard to find work for a skilled person, as you say, right? So if you're going out, you blog, you talk, you publish, that's going to work out pretty well, I would think, as long as you're good and you're willing to put in the effort. Now the second path that you can take is where you start more of a bigger organization, and you're starting to sell other people and products and specific services. It's very different to start, quote-unquote, a true company versus finding work for yourself. And if you get into that whole, I want to grow, I want to maybe have products or any of that, then I think that's a little bit of a different ball of wax, and you need to really think about how am I going to have a sales pipeline, how am I going to do marketing, and what are my vehicles for that.
And you have to enjoy the process of being a leader. You have to enjoy the managing process, or else you'll get yourself in a lot of trouble. If you like writing code, and suddenly you start running a company and you start to find out how much paperwork there is, and how many, I have 4 different states of paperwork that I have to file. It's like, that's not what I started out doing. I want to write software still, so you've got to make sure that you don't put yourself in a position where you're doing something you don't want to do either, because it really changes as your company grows.
That's a very good point, because if you have to decide if you're going to sell yourself or sell others, because the selling others is build up the structure, employees, build up a capability, and then now you're selling that versus there's something to be said for just getting really good at what you are and deciding, what I really want to do is have freedom. I'm going to sell myself. That's it.
Right.
And that works for a really large number of people.
I'll just say that I went through that earlier this year, where budget work coming in, and so I was like, there's no way one person can handle this, so let me try farming this work onto other people. And while the work got done, I wasn't very satisfied with it because, as you say, I like programming, I like coding, and so it got to the point where I was like, I enjoy doing this stuff. What I don't enjoy is like having to manage all the people, the communication. Then also when someone is coming on and you're giving them work, it's almost like feeding fuel to a fire. Like you're on this steam engine, just like you gotta keep on shoveling, and it's like, you know, I don't want to shovel coal. I don't want to keep on putting in there. I want to, you know. So, and also it's a margin thing too, because if you're like, okay, I'm gonna farm other people out or I have my own company, let's say the rate is whatever, I'll just make it up. So say it's $100 rate and then you're paying them, you know, 70, sure there's a margin there, but then if you're an expert and you get $120, you
There's some seats up front.
There's also some risk there, right?
Yes.
When you start hiring employees or sort of subcontracting, sounds kind of like what we're doing. There's risk, right? You're putting your reputation on the line for these people that hopefully do a good job.
And every decision you make, when I had 40 people working for me, it was a much different day when I walked into the office than it is when I have 4. You know, it's a whole different perspective. But even with 4, you still have payroll. You know, twice a month, that thing comes up that says you need to pay everybody. And when you're working for yourself and you say, you know what, I'll just chew on some ramen noodles this month. You can't ask your employees to do that. You know, they need to get paid. They expect your company to be structured, professional, and working. And you just can't say, well, you know, I'm just going to watch a marathon of Breaking Bad and take it easy for a week. You know, it's not
Well,
gonna happen.
and the problem is you can't just sit there and hope that people will just do a good job.
That's
Right?
right,
You have to
yeah,
have
yeah.
a process that's repeatable. And really the biggest problems I've ever had in my career as a business owner was whenever we deviated from that, where we thought, oh no, now we're good enough to just, you know, have people do their own thing. That's been a real problem. And now you find yourself in a position where you need a process that allows controlling and then allows quality control and all that. And now in a way you're in the worst possible position if you have 2 or 3 employees, because you still need as much process almost.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, the effort of creating that process is not worth it for a small number of people. So how do you get over that hump? And that's a big challenge. I think.
And hiring skills are really tough. I mean, that's probably one of the toughest things I've seen in industry is people really don't know how to hire people. And it's a scary process because you just can't say, well, looks like a good resume, let's go. I mean, there's a whole process to that as well.
Especially in our industry because it's so informal in a way. The best people are often the ones that have no formal qualifications or resume, which I find to be very, very unique to the software industry. If you're hiring a surgeon, you know, you're not just taking somebody who claims to be good and maybe has done some
done a
surgery.
good surgery online.
Yeah, exactly. So that's unique to our industry, I think.
The software industry continues.
It's tough for the smaller, when you're a small group too, because you have so much, when you're a larger company, it's easier to hide a bad decision, a hire, right? When you hire somebody, they're just not up to par, I mean, until you figure out what you're doing, you hire them fine. But if you're dealing with a small group, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, everyone's client facing, so everybody has to represent your brand and your company. And there's a lot of risk to that. And the other thing in this industry, everything's informal, but you also have a lot of people who just aren't good client. Everyone here who's worked in the software industry knows there might be someone who's brilliant sitting in front of a computer, but has no business talking to a customer. And so you have to find those people that are brilliant sitting in front of a computer because you can't babysit them. You don't have the time to do that. But you have to let them cut the moves in front of your clients. And that's a big risk. And I mean, I've been burned by that 3 times easily, just by hiring somebody who's technically very good, but they burned bridges with customers because they weren't great client-facing people. So you have to manage that. And then when you're small and it's your personal brand, that reflects personally on you because people are hiring you. And there's a lot, I mean, I've had resistance in farming off something to one of my guys because people come, no, I want you to work on it. I hired you, I know you, I've read your book or read your blog or seen you speak and I want you to do that. So you have to manage that as well. It's a tricky process when you start trying to grow. It's a lot easier if you're, you know, as you said, if you're going to sell yourself, it's a lot easier to walk and go from that than to try to grow into a 30 or 40 person company.
Ruth has a question they want to throw out.
What do you guys do for healthcare?
Insperity, United Healthcare PPO.
Like you buy it yourself or go?
Oh, okay.
Like
Context, because you got a lot of employees as well, and
Yeah, we're big enough to have a formal plan and
Yeah.
we have an HR person that manages that. And personally, I don't know that much about it.
For like JD and Tony who are smaller, how do y'all
So,
work on that?
well, I personally had to go through all the headache of researching and figuring out. I did that 4 years ago, and I've done the same thing ever since, and like it's worked. And that is, I love outsourcing. So I want people to outsource software engineering projects to me, and in the same vein, everything that's not software engineering at ClearMeasure, we outsource it to experts that do that little pocket of whatever it is. So I saw their booth, but for over 2 companies the last 6 years, I've loved Insperity because they are an outsourced HR department. And I remember way back when I worked for Dell, and with Insperity, all the ClearMeasure employees get all the same big company benefits that an enterprise would, because they co-employ your employees, even if it's only a small batch. I mean, on-call nurses at night, free legal assistance, death and dismemberment, the United Healthcare, PPO, 401k, all that stuff, and they handle it, and I don't have to know, and all of this Obamacare stuff, that's the regulations, I don't have to do the notices to my employees, and I don't have to know what regulations are coming up and how to keep in compliance. They do it. And the bill is just a little overhead on top of the payroll charge.
So I researched and have insurance through me for my wife, and we're about to have our first kids. So it is scary, but I mean, and I'm not a health expert, so obviously that is one thing that outsourcing to experts is probably like one of the lessons I would take away from this year, because after we had to file extension to meet the taxes also, I was like, this is the last year we're touching any of this stuff. Because I'm like, I want someone else to figure this out. Like, I'm going to show up and be like, here's all the information, let's just get it done. Because it was a nightmare. So,
Because you're the best at software,
yes,
not HR.
Yeah, I'm not HR. I'm terrible at that stuff.
Yeah,
But
we try to outsource too because, well, I have employees in 4 different states, and that really complicates it because I can't just say, well, let's just provide health insurance. It just isn't easy. And then we are looking at companies like Insperity that says, we will co-employ and therefore you're covered. Because it's really hard for a smaller company, especially if you have people that are remote. There's no simple solution, and every state's different, and every state's paperwork's different. And, ADP takes care of all our payroll and everything else, our filing, because I don't want to deal with that every day. It's hard enough at the end that I still have to deal with, even though I'm dealing with an outsourced company.
I think it's most important, if it goes back to the first question about getting started, knowing what your goal is, like Marcus, you brought up, if the goal is to have your own freedom and sell yourself and make more money on a salary job, that's one thing. If the goal is to build a company that becomes a living organism that is beyond just the person who started it, that's when this HR and health insurance becomes more important, because now you have to think past the 2 and 3 employees. No employee wants to call your wife or your buddy who's doing your HR when you're getting started. You need either to employ a professional who's taking care of that department, or get a real company, a real vendor to do all that stuff, because there are going to be all kinds of questions that need to be answered, and it's the worst thing to have you personally talk to them about how much their copay is going to be. And so either if your goal is to build a company that's going to scale to some level, you need to have that as a first-class part of your structure. Either hiring an experienced person internally to do it, or find a vendor to do it.
For a long time, I was just myself, and I had no intention of growing. But my wife really wanted a separate health insurance so she came off her job. And so the way we got around that was I hired her. And then we need group health insurance. You have to have 2 employees. And you can hire your spouse without having to do a lot of the paperwork and a lot of the stuff. Your spouse, you get away, you get around a lot of things. And that worked out great in this one. We've got a standard, I think, United Healthcare health insurance.
Jeffrey, at some point, Insperity becomes a little bit more difficult. At what point do you expect that to happen in a company's growth?
So I have no idea. I left Headspring after hiring you when it was 30 people, and you're now 50 and it's still working, right? So I don't know that threshold. But yeah, at some point, I don't think any Fortune 500 companies use Insperity. At some point, you say, you know what? Okay, we'll have an internal HR department or do something different. But I don't know.
Do you outsource your legal too, with contract reviews, et cetera? What do you do about the legal needs?
You're touching on the most frustrating point in the whole experience, I think. Like in our case, we actually have several different lawyers. We have a separate law firm that does immigration, for instance. We have a separate law firm that does contracts and any kind of agreement we have. Now, over the years, I think I've gotten relatively good at dealing with contract stuff, probably more so than I want to be. So we have a standard template, and as long as you can stick reasonably close to that, I'm comfortable reviewing some of that myself. But for the most part, once it gets beyond that very basic stuff, we have somebody specifically that we hire for that. And we also have a company in Europe, so same over there, although that's a lot easier. Because just fundamental law covers a lot more, but definitely recommend that you go with a specialist for the particular area that you need. And as you start out, the first contract, and a lot of people just go and they download some template and then put their own name in and send it off to the customer, and they run with that. But I would definitely recommend that you start out getting a good contract template for a lawyer that fits your needs. And it's difficult because one of the things about our industry is the way we build stuff these days, especially in agile projects and so on, makes it almost impossible to have a contract that really conforms with US law. I mean, in agile you have this fundamental problem that the simplest thing that you have in a contract, which is we will give you this and in return you give us X. In an agile project, you almost can't put that in words. So it's a very difficult problem to solve.
Maybe an underlying question is how do you get started with the legal stuff? And I'll just go over what we did, because Clear Measure was January 1st, and so what we did, the steps to get off the ground on the legal side, because now we have multiple firms for trademark and IP versus general counsel versus litigation. But to get started, you got to select your company type, incorporate, or select that. You got a trademark. You got filings with the Secretary of State of Texas, if it's a Texas company. So there's a series of steps to get started with any sort of company, because if you do just a named company and doing business as, it works great if you're by yourself, but if you're building a company, you don't want the contracts in your name. You want some separation, because it's just a hedge against, okay, if somebody big sues you, even if they're wrong, it could clean you out personally. So we used successfully LegalZoom.com, a $35 per month business subscription, $400 for an S-Corp filing for the state of Texas, $350 for a trademark search and trademark filing process. They handle it all. For the subscription, you get access to their lawyers, like 30-minute appointments for advice and calling. They can draft documents for an upcharge. They have a library of general contracts and all kinds of different legal documents that you can take as templates and then modify them. And that, so if you have nothing, and again, I had some experience doing it before, so take that with a grain of salt. But their service, I was happy with, just to do the incorporation getting started point. And now we're done with them, and we've got the 3 different firms per specialty.
Just to add to what he was saying, you mentioned the DBA thing, and you can get away with that, but a lot of companies, especially big companies, won't hire you to do any kind of contract work if you're only doing DBA. They won't sign contracts with individuals. 1099 work is what they call it. They won't do this because they've probably gotten dinged by the IRS, or their lawyers told them they will get dinged by the IRS. You need to do either an LLC or an S-Corp or something like that. Another thing is a lot of the insurance you're probably going to need to sign with these companies. They won't do it to a DBA. They'll only insure an S-Corp or an LLC or a C-Corp or something like that. So a DBA, if you're going to be doing this for a while, a DBA is just not going to cut it.
I agree. An LLC it's just so easy to set up. You know, you go online, you spend 15 minutes doing it, and you know, the paperwork's done. So it's well worth it to have just that layer. And then not only do you have an identity that can stand on its own, but you have that little wall of protection.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fairly big wall, really, for, I think your corporate, it costs you, what, $310 in the state of Texas?
I think you can
And,
do it even cheaper.
yeah, you can probably do it cheaper, and it really provides a lot of protection, and the reality is, if somebody wants to take you to the cleaners, there's nothing you can do about it. People can hassle you, they can sue you, they can cause you expenses you will never recover, and they can just try to strong-arm you into that. And if you have the corporation that protects you from that, especially if you're doing a service-based company, harder if you do a product company where you have to abandon your products, but in a service-based company, I feel that the corporation really provides a lot of protection, and if the worst happened, you could step away from that, and people know that, so they will not just hassle you out of the blue because they can strong-arm you into something. You know, that's
Unless it's load sys, then they love throwing.
Since Darren brought that up, on the subject of insurance, business insurance, what's the minimum you think that you need in terms of like
Well,
liability?
so there's the minimum I think I need, and there's the minimum that companies require. Generally, when I sign, so if you sign with like a really big company, what they're going to want you to do is sign what they call a master services agreement, and then you sign like they call it different things, but you kind of sign a different kind of separate, smaller agreement for each project you do. And the master service agreement is going to have something to the effect of you need, they'll specify like general liability insurance, company general liability insurance, and the way they'll specify it is like, they'll say like 1 million, 2 million. And what that means is 1 million for a given incident, 2 million total. And then most all companies will require the general liability. Smart companies will require you to give what I call professional liability insurance. People call it errors and omissions insurance. And they'll also specify 1 million, 2 million. That 1 million, 2 million is almost always what I see. Sometimes it's 2 million, 2 million, usually no more than that. But I carry a little more than that.
Where do you find that?
Techinsurance.com.
How much does it cost?
It's based on how much money you make, so your revenue and number of employees. They also ask you things like, they ask you like, do you sign a contract with every company you work for? Do you have a lawyer look over stuff? If you sell products, do you have a lawyer look over your EULA? They ask you a ton of questions. Do you do website? Do you do security auditing? So it's all, I'm sure all that kind of plugs in, but the overwhelming majority of it seems to come from how much money you make, because that kind of depends on how much people can sue you for. So
We pay $79 to $179 a month. I can't remember which one it is. It's one or the other for ours.
yeah, I pay yearly for both. It's in the $3,500 to $4,000 range, something like that. Now I have had companies. I did some work for utility companies, and they like gave me the same contract they give the people who drive the utility trucks and stuff, and so they required me to buy automotive insurance through my company, like company automotive insurance. And you know, companies are going to do this, and they have rules and regulations, and don't get upset about it. Just charge them for it. I tell people all the time, I don't get upset. I just get expensive. And so it was expensive. It was more than my other. It was like $5,000 a year or something. I just said, you know what? People don't require this, and their HR people said, yeah, I know. And I just charged them for it. And I sent them a bill.
Well, then it's a real thing. For instance, I negotiated a $4.5 million contract, and there was a term that they wanted a letter of credit, which was on top of errors and omission, a letter of credit where if they were not satisfied and they canceled the contract, and they could get this sum of money as pull it back. And so the letter of credit from the bank basically was an extra insurance policy, and it cost some money, And so part of negotiating the contract, they wanted this insurance policy, and so they paid the premium for the insurance policy. And it just, you charge them, and so it's like, okay, if you want this and it's valuable to you, it's a $4.5 million contract and you want to mitigate the risk, then great, we will do that. The premium costs this much, we'll be transparent with you, and we'll put it in the invoice. And it's actually no big deal, it's just, that was important to the client, they really wanted it.
Almost everything when you start talking to the people think when they're dealing with a big company that this stuff is non-negotiable. It is absolutely negotiable. I had a big company, well, I'll just say it because they're out of business, Enron. One of the things they wanted me to sign was they wanted me to sign something saying that they could call up any one of my customers, current or prior, and ask them about their financial dealings with me. And so, you know, like I told you guys, I deal with, I rely on these people to refer work, right? I mean, that's how I get more work, and I don't want them thinking that I'm some sort of embezzling person who's doing who knows what with the Enron guys. So I told them, no, I'm not signing it. And so they said, well, everybody signs it. I said, well, I'm not going to sign it. I'll just go work, do something else. And they said, well, we're not going to ever call your other companies. We just need you to sign this. And I said, well, then great. Then if you're not ever going to use it, then we don't need to sign it. And the lawyer on the other side of the phone says, well, let me get with my supervisor and I'll call you back. And I never heard anything, and they called me up, and I signed the other paperwork, and I went to work for them. You know, I mean,
that's really one of the most puzzling things about contracts. There's always all these clauses, and if you, we're never going to do that.
well, then strike
it's in the
it.
contract then, right?
And I've done that with a lot of contracts. I'm like, I don't like this clause, this clause, this clause, this clause.
And I will walk away from things.
Absolutely. I don't recall ever signing a contract that unchanged from what was given to me. I just don't even remember.
They put a lot of crap in those.
So sometimes you guys are talking about this business insurance and it sounds like it's per project or per engagement with a client. And sometimes it's overall.
It's overall. They just, it's something that's for your business, but the people who you sign contracts with are going to require that you carry X amount of insurance. And that's what I was saying. So in their contracts.
I mean, there's some big companies who will just not ask.
The smart ones will ask you and specify what you want, but
and some of them will ask because they need to ask, and then
yeah.
if you don't have it, nobody ever asks again.
Some of them will also ask to be named on your policy, and that's one good thing about tech insurance. Like they'll say, we need to be named on your policy, and all that does is if you drop your policy or you change, like you lower how much you're carrying, they will call that company and tell them. And tech insurance is great because all you got to do is send them an email and say, I need XYZ company named on my policy, and they'll email you a new policy with them named on it, and you just email that to them. It's like a PDF. It's awesome.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about risk management. And the insurance policies are one way to manage risk, but it's not the only way, I feel. So we do pretty much what you described. So we have usually the minimum that our customers require us to do. Ironically, I find that having insurance in some cases can actually increase your risk. And I was kind of on the other side of that fence a while back. We got pretty lucky in the 20 years the company has been around. Really only had one case where we actually had to go after somebody to a point where it almost got to a lawsuit. And it was about a sizable amount of money. We're talking $1 million range. And it became somewhat clear that there was just an entity formed that had gone away, and they used that as risk management, decided, well, it wasn't worth doing, or whatever the case might have been. But it was very, very difficult to go after that company and collect from them. And then we discovered at some point that they had some insurance. And that, from our point of view, was, well, that's great. Now we can really go after them because now we have a chance of getting something. And that really got me thinking, like, people really probably look at that the same way from the other side. And if I have a lot of insurance, I'm a much more interesting target for a lot of people. So we usually go with the minimum that our customers require us, but we use other risk management techniques, like we have different companies set up. So one of the most valuable things that we own is probably a lot of the brands we have. Code Magazine is a brand that's been around for a long time. It's very valuable to us. But the Code Magazine brand and a few other brands are actually owned by a separate company. And it makes sense for us for a variety of reasons, like those brands are licensed to UPS here in the US, but they're also internationally licensed to other companies. And to me, that's also a very valuable part of the risk management things.
That's a good point about risk management, because the only way to avoid all this legal stuff is to actually do a good job and get your customers to love you, because it's just a free country. You can sue somebody for anything, just you don't have to be right.
Well, and if you sue, whoever you sue is not going to get the money back they're going to
Right.
spend on defending themselves. So
Right, so the point is, do a good job, and then one thing I'll say about cash flow, because whoever has the cash is the one that doesn't have to take legal action, and so one thing on all of our contracts, once a company comes to us and decides that we're the person for the project, they've never gone away because we ask for an upfront deposit. So we ask for the first estimated month's invoice as a day one deposit, and we keep it on our balance sheet until the end of the project. If they ever don't pay an invoice, then we've got a deposit to cover it without taking legal action. They would have to initiate the legal action if they felt they needed to get it back from us. And so that's another thing we do, besides doing a good job about managing that legal risk.
yeah, we do a lot of prepaid blocks these days. We offer different options. We used to do that, we still do it, and then we got into offering prepaid blocks, which really works well for agile projects. And we offer a pretty good discount on that, and now I think something like 99% of our customers do that.
Question. Regarding, you were talking about using multiple corporations to basically shield yourself or shield trademark type assets or branding type assets. Does that also apply to IP? In other words, can you have effectively a holding company to license out your IP to a company that does business with that IP?
So IP in the sense of like software. Yeah, for instance, we own Code Framework, which is an open source framework for business application development. And even though we do a lot of consulting around that, and that's a big part of our income, the actual framework product is owned by a separate legal entity.
In addition to doing a good job, which is really important, the most important thing, probably the second most important thing is to make sure that you communicate well with your client and deliver bad news as soon as possible. Don't hold on to it. If things are going bad, you need to be up front and deliver that, because they're going to be, if you deliver that news immediately when it happens and early on, there's time to fix it. There's time to do something about it, and there's time to figure out if, well, maybe we don't want to continue on. If you just try and hide that and keep going, that's when really bad things happen.
I have to say, being independent, that's the part that I actually enjoy the most. In fact, the client communication, no, not giving but the client communication, that I felt that sometimes in different places of working, you would be, the tier of communication would be the sales, and then maybe the project manager, then things would reach to you, and then there is sometimes a flow or a friction in terms of delivering that bad news, like you're saying, okay, or like, say the salesperson promised a deadline of this, and you can clearly look at it and go, there's no way we can meet this deadline. And what they often response has been like, we'll just work harder, and it's like, we're not going to be able to meet. And then when it doesn't happen, the client gets really, really upset. And you've been part of the scenario. And it's not fun as a developer, because it rolls downhill and like it's all landing on your lap, and you're like, well, I'm not the one that promised the date. I'm the one that wanted to communicate. And I found that being independent and talking with the clients, that delivering the bad news or whatever, like having that discussion is what I enjoy the most about the agile process that I have, is talking with them all the time, discussing what's going to happen this week and what isn't going to happen this week, and if they're like, okay, this feature is most important, or they deliver that feature, well, we want A, B, and C, and like, well, there's no chance to get A, B, and C, A or B or C, and having that discussion. And if you don't like talking with the client, so we mentioned having someone who's not good at that client interaction. If you're not good with client interaction, then being a freelancer is probably not going to be the ideal work that you want, because you're always talking to them, and part of that also is finding the right client, because that communication is two-way, and you have to find that client that will appreciate that communication and honesty. Because I dealt with one client where I had little warning signs, and my instinct was, well, he's not the best person in the world, but the project's so big and there's so much money, you're like, I'm just going to keep on going because the money's so good. Well, the money was not worth the hassle and everything involved with it. That I was like, hindsight, lesson learned. I have that trial period when I'm trying to figure out, is the client good? If the client isn't good, then Don't pay attention to the money, pay attention to the fact that the client relationship is good. Because that's what's gonna end up being most important, because not only doing a good job, the person who they call up or talk to has to say that you did a good job, and if the person doesn't have that good relationship, then it's not a proper investment. You're investing in the client.
I think you hit on
That
it.
too, also. It can be that relationship training.
Yes, some of them can, improve. That's why I was like hoping, this guy would hopefully improve. But as time went on, it's clear to see that, this thing wasn't working. And in fact, I had someone else come on, and he was going to help me out. And the first meeting with the client, they had this explosive argument. And I was like, what's going on? And that should have been another warning sign that clearly, that there's something wrong with this.
Well, your conversation is a demonstration of leadership, and whether you're building a firm or you're an independent contractor, your clients desperately want leadership. And if you're one of the people who sits around and waiting for someone else to take the lead so you can follow, it's going to be really hard to do either types of businesses.
And what Jonathan said is really critical. You touched on the point of expectations. And your clients, even for us, we're a shrink wrap software company. We ship a product on the internet, tens of thousands of people. We're not dealing with one client at a time. But we still have to manage our expectations. So if you go into a client and they say, we need this done in 3 months, as software developers, we're optimists. We say, oh, hell yeah, we can do that. No problem. But if, over and over again, that things come up. Either the specifications that aren't quite right, or something shifts in the technology, or there's something you just didn't see. What you need to make sure you're doing is setting these expectations that, we cannot do all this in X time. We're going to need longer than that. And if you beat that, wonderful. But if you're not good at telling your customer no, if you're not good at telling your client, this can't be done like this, we have to do it this other way, then you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble. Then you're always going to be sitting there behind the 8 ball saying, shoot, I got 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks of work to do in 2 days. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to look good, and everyone's going to lose the matter, and you probably will be on the end of a lawsuit or something else. So one of the first things you have to learn is to really set the expectations and to say no, and to make sure that they understand that you're in control of the project, because you're the one that understands the technology. You're the one that understands what has to be delivered. If you don't understand what they want, if you don't know how to actively listen to what they want and then deliver on that, you're again going to be in trouble. So that's another skill that's going to keep you out of trouble. If you just say, yeah, you want a delivery system that's going to take care of your invoicing, got it, no problem. If that's where you leave a conversation to sign a contract, you're in deep trouble. You've got to get down there and really find out what their expectations are, what they're going to need at the end of this project, and what you're going to be able to deliver in that time frame, and make sure you're really clear about that. Because if you're not, then somebody's going to get hurt in the whole deal, and it's just not a good situation.
We're almost there, we're pretty much out of time, so let's do like 1 or 2 quick ones. I know you're waiting.
Yeah, I had a question, kind of in terms of mobile development. I believe you had mentioned you've done some, on the legal side of things, I have my developer license just registered in my name. Should I be concerned about any, issues that are getting registered?
You can have them change it, it's kind of painful. This is Apple.
No, I'm actually, right now I'm just doing Windows and Android.
Okay,
yeah.
maybe Google's better. It's possible to do it either way. Okay. I would put it in my company name. I would
It's like an LLC,
Yeah.
So a quick question on the team building. So let's say you started a company and you are the sole owner of the company and you're passionate about what you do. How do you transfer that passion to your team members?
You got to pick the right ones. That's where recruiting is so hard, and not recruiting for who knows the technology, because that can be taught. Recruiting for who thinks like you. Who is a value fit for you? One, knowing what you believe and how you think and what's important from a principles standpoint, and then finding people who are in lockstep, who value the same things that you do. You can teach all the different task-based stuff, but you can't teach someone to think differently, to value different things, and to be passionate about different things.
I actually ended up hiring 2 people that were customers first, 3 people actually, that were customers first of mine. and they were passionate about it. They were doing my online support for free, and I went, hey, you want to get paid for that? You know, so find people that are not necessarily they think the exact same way as you, but are as passionate about what you're trying to do.
But the thing is, it's kind of difficult because I feel that the technology landscape is changing every day, every minute, right? What was true yesterday is not true today.
It's exceptionally hard. It's by far the hardest part of running a business, and you know, it sounds so straightforward in theory. Oh, you just search until you find the right people. Well, one of the things that I think you have to realize, or that I had to come and realize, and was difficult for me, is what you're looking for is exactly what you said. People that think the same way, people who are just as passionate about it, and you just jive with, and it's just a smooth process, and they just think like you do. But the reality is, if they think like you do, they would have just started their own company. So you're not going to find those people, and if you do find those people, they will probably be with you for a while and then move on and do their own thing. You know, like JB used to work for us, and you know, did a very good job, a lot of things, brought a lot of things to the company that we still value and do to this day, but eventually he moved on and did his own thing. And initially, when I first started my company, it was very difficult to accept, but then over time I just realized that that's just part of the game, you know, that's just part of what you do. And in a way, I'm very proud of the fact that there's a lot of people that have gone through my company who then set out on their own, and you know, we can still sit here side by side and are friends and all that. That's kind of a cool part, but it's difficult to accept because every time somebody leaves and does that, it hurts your business. And then there's the other people that, you know, they're not exactly what you're looking for, but you have to hire them anyway because you need someone. You know, you can't search for the perfect person.
And they won't leave.
We're all programmers.
You want to start your own company?
So we're all programmers, and technically, if you were going to hire a juggler for your kid's birthday party, you probably want to see him juggle before you brought him to the birthday party. So we're all programmers here, and if you want to do a certain job, you gotta see them do it. You can't just talk to them in English, you know, back and forth across a desk, and not do anything of that program, and then expect them to come to the job and actually do what you expected in here them to do.
And I've
You need
spent time
to
with
demonstrate.
I've spent time with people at conferences and social environments to see how they react in their personality, because the personality conflicts are going to be your hardest part.
we have people do a small sample scenario that we usually have them implement in various technologies, and that helps a little bit. But still, the outcomes of hiring is just mind-blowing at times. I mean, we've had people that we barely wanted to hire, but just thought, yeah, okay, there's kind of something there that feels right, but probably not. And we hired them, and it turned out great. And then you have people that should have been the superstars, and maybe in some ways they were, but they just did not fit in at all. And you hire one wrong person, and it throws off the chemistry across the entire team.
But once you realize you made a mistake, fix it immediately.
Slow to hire, quick to fire.
Because the good people, so some of my employees over the years have told me that the thing that they appreciated the most is that I took action to remove the people who were not a fit. And it's not just a one-way street. It's a candid conversation. The company has to be a fit for them. It's a two-way street. And by pulling them along and it's not fitting, not justice to them, because there's going to be another company where it's going to click and they're going to be a rock star.
So let me go with some of my life stories that tailors right into it, where I spent a year looking around for the right, because some people, there was a lot of conversation I felt about like having your own software company, but there's also a representative, I'm happy in my job and I want to maybe try this freelancing thing, and you're probably going to try and find more information. So little short story, so I wasn't happy looking a bunch of different places trying to find the right fit, and I worked at some fantastic places, and the last place I went in, it was great salary, but I knew the day of, like 10 a.m. that morning, I was like, this job stinks. I hated it. It was, every day was torture, and all the advice I got from all my friends, everybody was like, the money is good, just stick with it. It was not it was not. So, but
most of us weren't even there at 10 a.m.
So it was a terrible fit. But I kept on going through, but it was a mistake. I was sort of looking outside, but I didn't know where to go because I just spent a year trying to figure out where I wanted to go. And ended up right before some deadline or whatever, they fired me. And it was like, you know, at first you're like, wow, like you got fired. I'm like, I deserve to be fired. It was a terrible fit. It wasn't because I did great code. In fact, I had people I talked to afterwards, like managers saying, we loved your code, it's just you were not a good fit for the company. And it was great that they fired me because it actually led me to go join another company, joined Chai1 at that time, and I completely changed my technology stack, completely changed the type of customers I was working with, and I realized, you know what? I really like working with Rails, working with startups, and that's where I get a lot of passion. And that's what led me eventually to start doing my own startup. And then after I was like, I can't do this job and my startup at the same time, so I'll go start working on my startup. 6 weeks after that, Chai1 contacted me, previous employer, like, we have some contract work, do you want to pick that up? I was like, okay, sure, I'll do that to help pay the bills as I work on my startup. Then as time went on, I got another gig and another gig. Next thing you know, I'm working on all these freelance gigs, and I didn't like working on my startup anymore, and ta-da, that's how I became a freelancer. So that's a typical story, because people ask, like, how do you start there? Most of the time, your first gig is going to be previous customer, your previous employer, and then that gets you out there, and then you do these talks and get this authority figure, and people come up with you, and then you slowly build this business, and that's when you suddenly have to come to the decision of, am I building the business for me to be free and be a freelance expert, or am I building a business because I want to start my own software company? And that is a personal choice in which you're personally passionate about. I don't think there is a conclusion or answer. And so all these things and who you're targeting, what's going on, is stuff that you have to figure out for yourself. And on a side note, you notice we talk about outsourcing health insurance, outsourcing law, notice all these expenses. And that's why I talk to people about how much does it pay or how much is going on. I was like, well, let's fake figures here. Let's say with a full-time employee, you make $100 an hour. Well, as a freelancer, let's say you make $180 an hour. But before you start going, it's raining money, and I'm thinking about the Cosby Show, where it's like, okay, now here's the money that you have to pay for insurance. Here's the money you have to put aside for taxes. Here's the money you have to do. And so next thing you know, that amount that your 180 is actually going down a lot, because all that overhead that your company was paying, you're now paying. So when you're thinking about your rate and you're calculating, okay, what do I need to charge to make what I'm making now? Add a generous overhead. I think I can't remember the blogger, but he has one great advice. It's like, figure out your rate and then double it. And then that is the rate you should go with. And it's been good advice, I think.
One more, then we're officially out of time.
I'm just curious, when you talk about doing a good job, client communication, sometimes the political process gets in the way because you have someone paying the bill, so to speak, and then you have the worker bees. So what are some examples you've been able to overcome that and truly provide software that met somebody's needs?
I've made 3 mistakes over the last 6 years where it really bit, and that was when an executive signs the contract and he's the one paying the bills. Then through the organization, we end up reporting through a different channel, and during the project, we didn't pull the true boss back into it and make sure that his or her expectations are met to the T. He's signing the checks. His name is on the contract. Even though he delegated somebody else in the organization, if you're billing yourself as the professional, you can't then blame the politics of their organization for failure. So 3 times in the last 6 years, I've made the same mistake over again. And so now it's my rule of thumb. Whoever signs that contract, they're my customer.
The thing is, include all the stakeholders. Everybody that's involved in the process, you need to make sure they're all in the communication cycle.
I would say the biggest thing that I try and do is keep my promises. If somebody forces a deadline on me and I say, well, I don't think we can make it, that's one thing. But if I say, yeah, we're going to deliver, I deliver. It may be painful if I can't estimate, but that's my fault, not their fault. If I tell them I'm going to do it, I do it. And that's the end of it.
I think big company, small company, whoever you're dealing with, they have to have skin in the game. That's my point of view. Dealt with the individual where our troublesome one, he wasn't paying the bills, like his other company was paying the bills, and that was another thing where it's like, next time, like either they're paying the bill or it's like some sort of process that it isn't just free money they're handing out because they're not as tied to the expense.
And you really got to do 2 things that are very difficult for us, I think, as software developers, and that is, number one, you got to figure out a way to have better estimates, and that's just enormously difficult. but you're usually facing a customer who has unrealistic expectations. So if you do an excellent job, you probably still came in under their expectations. So I find it very, very difficult in this industry to exceed expectations, because what are you going to do? Implement everything they wanted and 50% more? You know, it just, in all our other businesses, we have ways to far exceed expectations. In the software industry, I find that almost impossible. So at the very least, you've got to get to a point where what you promise you deliver. And then the second thing is, you just, I always say you got to be somewhat naive in terms of the workload and then be willing to do it. And you know, anyone who goes into this thinking they're going to do a 40-hour week, it's not going to happen.
And it may not be because of work. I mean, even if, I mean, he's kind of in the same situation I'm in. If you bill 40 hours, you're probably working like 50 or 55.
Or more.
And for every customer I add, it adds like 10 hours. So I generally work for more than one customer at a time. And so if I might only bill each customer 20 hours a time a week, and usually it's less because it's really hard to bill a full week, but you know, I'm really working like 60 when I have two of them, and I'm billing, let's say I bill 40, I'm probably really working 60 by the time you invoice them, by the time you're giving them status, by the time you're doing some things that aren't really necessarily billable.
I think what you're saying, because it depends on what your business structure is.
Yeah, you're doing all the administration as well. Right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I'm the one being banned. I mean, my wife does my accounting and stuff, but she doesn't manage the client. She doesn't take phone calls when they have a quick question or whatever. You know, I'm doing all that.
It's in our industry, the saying, or in any industry, the saying goes, it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. Right? So as you're moving through new technologies, you know, we all probably moved into doing Android or iOS development stuff now, and we may have had a Microsoft background. At least that's the way it worked for us. Well, how exactly do you put in those 10,000 hours? If you're billing your customer for that, you know, at your regular rate, that's probably not really cool, right? So somehow you got to put in at least some of that time.
And that's part of that 20 hours. I guess I wasn't completely clear. Part of that is sharpening the saw, right? You have to read blogs, and I mean, I read blogs. I don't really read many tech books anymore, but
you come here today.
Yeah, I come here.
Like
discounts. I mess around with technology. I download new SDKs and mess around. So some of that time is also in that. It's not all managing the client and building people.
For managing employees, we have the 40 hours a week, 40-hour work week, work hard, go home, and bill. But then I tell them, you know, to their eyes, 40-hour work week, go home, and I say, you need to sharpen your sword. You need to read. You need to keep up with the industry. You need to do these other things. You need to go to user groups. So that's for the individual. That margin needs to be there, because if you have employees and work them to the bone, they're not going to keep up with their skills because there's no time left.
That's right.
Well, the employees are probably not the ones that are necessarily doing this, but you probably will be the ones that are putting in the long time.
We're officially over time, so thanks all for coming. Thanks, guys.